Hello and welcome back to Saw Sisters. It's been a while since we've posted, and that's because we've been busy. The project you're about to see was the most difficult we've done so far, and between that and everyone working full-time, it just took a long time to get here. Anyway, today we're working on making a shoe bench. This is an idea. I had to both create a place for shoe storage and some place for people to sit, to put on, or to take their shoes off. I need this for two reasons. First, I have a lot of shoes.
Yay!
It would be nice for my husband to have some place to put all his shoes as well.
Yay!
Second, I'm Russian, and we don't let people wear shoes inside the house. Hi! How are you? How's your day?
Good, pretty good. How's yours?
Good. Let's go sit over here.
Oh, cool. Куда по помытому я только помыла, ходят тут всякие.
So, now you know the why, let's talk about the how. Here's a quick breakdown of this bench. There are 3 legs holding up 4 shelves capped by a thick board for a bench top. The shelves attach to the legs with a tongue and stopped dado joint, which don't go all the way to the front edge of the legs. Finally, the bench top is attached in the same manner, with tongues on the legs slotting into stopped dados in the top. Now we know what we're building, let's get started! First up, we rough cut the sides and shelves from a couple long boards we got at the lumber yard. Since the sides and shelves are all the same width and thickness, we only needed to source one size of board. Interestingly, we got these oak boards for cheaper than pine at Home Depot. Guess it pays to support local business. Next, I ripped the bench top board to the proper width. This is the biggest piece of wood I've ever cut. And also, the cut needed to be pretty much perfect, as the edges are highly visible. Amazing everyone, I did this rip cut perfectly. After ripping to width, I cut the top to length on the miter saw. It's just easier to handle crosscuts this way. I then took all the shelves and sides and ripped them to width. The original board was pretty close already, so it didn't take much to get to dimension. Since these were rough boards, I first trimmed one edge just enough to get a clean square edge, then flipped the boards over and cut the remainder off the other edge. I did mess up my feed speed. I needed to push the boards through faster, as there was pretty significant burning on the edges. This hands off, but it's extra work. Anyway, at this point the boards were to size, so I marked them to make one edge the back. Since the sides get dados routed in them to accept a matching tongue on the shelves, and these dados end before the front edge of the sides, we opted to use a router table. Here I'm setting up 2 measurements, the distance between the edge of the router bit and the table, and the distance between the far edge of the router bit and a stop block. This will let me cut the dados in exactly the right place and to the exact right length, in theory. With Lena handling the power switch off screen, I made my very first router cut. This was scary and new and not much fun, but I did it and it came out great. Once. It came out great once. After that, I managed to mess up every dado. Nothing so bad that it ruined the work, but not good either. Frustration level mounting. Oh my God!
Oh. I mean, this is not really big deal.
Anyway, after I was finished ruining the dados for the sides, I set the router to cut the dados in the bench top that the sides will go into. The long top piece fought me every step of the way. It acted like a lever and kept dragging on the table. This first cut actually went pretty well. Here's where I started messing up cuts. This cut went pretty well until the end, when I let it move before the router stopped spinning. Little nick, no big deal. As you can see, I had to stop short due to the amount of chips between the stop block and work, and I redid this cut after clearing the table. And immediately screwed up. This took a chunk of wood out of the board, and it's clearly visible on the underside of the bench. Oops! Anyway, let's try a third time. If you notice, I point my left finger to tell Lena to shut off the saw. She was so certain I'd mess this up again, she shut it off before I said so. Now for the other end. And that went well. Now the top was done, we started squaring up the ends of the shelves and sides. The miter saw wasn't exactly at 0 degrees, and there was a slight angle to the ends. Luckily, we cut everything a little long anyway, so no damage done. After that, we started cutting the tongue shoulders on the shelves, with a tongue on each end of each shelf. Only after cutting all the tongues did we realize we cut them too narrow.
How did we end up doing woodworking?
Well, growing up playing with Barbies and dollhouses pretty much guaranteed we would end up working with our hands. Since we cut all the tongues too narrow at 1/4 inch wide instead of 1/2 inch, they just fall out of the side dados. So we had to cut all the shelves narrower to remove the tongues and recut everything. I also cut the first inch off the front of the tongues to match the dados on the sides. After cutting the tongues again, we started fitting them to the dados. Some of the tongues were slightly too tall and bottomed out in the dado rather than bottoming on the shoulder. This was leaving a gap between the sides and the shelves, so we had to carefully measure the gap and trim the tongues down. After eventually getting the shelves correct, I started on side to top tongues. This was the same process as for the shelves, but only after cutting one did I realize we didn't square up the edges of the sides. Luckily, this just meant I had to do a cleanup pass before cutting the tongues. To verify the top and bottom were parallel, I measured at the front and back and compared the measurements. Everything looked good. After all the shelves were properly fit to the sides, we decided it was a good time to glue up the bench body. Since we have a chronic shortage of clamps, we glued up one half, then came back the next day and did the other. We ended up clamping a speed square and a block of wood into the first half to hold it square while the glue dried. This worked pretty well, except we glued the block to the work.
It glued.
Remember we cut the shelves narrower? That makes the sides closer together and they won't fit in the dado cut in the top. Awesome. So, we glued scrap bits of oak into the outer two dados and then sanded them down to the surface. This was a ton of work and could have been avoided if we cut the top dados after everything else was done. Or, not screwed up the tongues. Since we wanted the new dados to fit, we placed the body onto the top upside down. This let us place the center leg into its dado and then mark the inner and outer edges of the two side dados. Notice that we set the stop block raised up from the table. That allows the wood chips from the router to go into the block instead of piling up on the table and blocking the work from reaching the stop block.
This is good.
Okay. Now, being an experienced hand at dados, I screw up the dado badly. I obviously wasn't watching the fence during this cut, and the workpiece pivoted since I was pushing it with my right hand. So I had to recut the dado again. It was now way too wide at one end, but at least one edge was straight and accurate. Yeah. For the other end, I had to pull the work towards me due to using the crosscut sled this time. This was not a good idea. Probably should have clamped the work to the sled.
It moves all the time. It's so hard to hold it in place.
So, what else did we forget to do? Cut the front edge of the tongues off the sides before assembly. So, handsaw time. As you can see, we were tired of this project by this point.
Oh, wow.
There's a slight warp to one of the sides, so the top didn't just drop on. We fixed this by clamping the opposite end and the middle leg together, which pulled the top over enough for the treble end to fit. Then it was glue up time, which we filmed none of due to extreme panic. Yay! It's all one piece! Finally! This was the first time either of us felt any accomplishment on this project. Now that everything is glued together and definitely can't be replaced, let's attack the top with a router. Lena used a 3/4 inch roundover bit to make a nice edge. Since this is her first time ever using a router, she practiced a lot on scrap before starting on the bench. Since we don't want to round over the back edge of the bench and starting on a corner can cause tear out, we clamped on a starting block. She did an excellent job and the end result looked wonderful. Routers are really great tools, if you can control them. With that final shaping done, it was then time to sand everything. We spent hours sanding this bench, but you only have to spend seconds.
Sanding montage!
Construction done. It was now time to pick a finish. Here you see us testing several different combinations. We decided to use wood stain. To get a
You
darker
suck!
color, and then coat that with amber shellac. To get a darker color, and then coat that with amber shellac. And to top it off, a coat of lacquer to protect the shellac from water damage. Hey, the bench has no bracing and will probably collapse to the side as soon when someone sits on it. Let's add a back panel to provide shear strength and keep the whole thing square.
But good.
So why did we add the back to the shoe bench? This is a model of what we built, and as you can see, it can take the downward pressure just fine. But once we apply sideways pressure, it simply collapses. By adding the back to it, we make sure it is stable, both with downward pressure and shear stress. After the wood stain dried, we started painting shellac onto the bench. This is an amber shellac flake mixed with alcohol to make a 2-pound cut. Turns out alcohol stinks, and we were going to go blind or get drunk if we kept smelling it. Before putting on the lacquer, we decided this was a good time to install leveling feet on the bench. Here, Lena is using a dowel jig to line up her drill. Next, plastic inserts got hammered into these holes, and then the feet screwed into these inserts. I was referring to Breaking Bad. Thank you! Could you just tell me when you do this?
Could you just not talk too much, please? I love you.
Finally, it was time for a final rub with steel wool, and we sprayed 3 coats of lacquer onto the bench over the rest of the day. So it's been a couple of days and the finish is fully dry, so let's move it inside.
What you doing?
Which
Выкрутить наоборот.
Вот.
Все, нормально, пока, уходи.
Она и семечки здесь грызет, в конце концов, это сколько грязи от них приходит, тут все убираешь, никакого покоя нет.
This has been the most challenging and involved project so far. We made a few mistakes along the way, mostly due to this being the first time we used the router. The router is a loud, angry, whirling blade demon that wants to murder us and ruin our projects. I found trying to push a piece of wood through the router table is like trying to control a Ouija board with 5 other people's hands on it.
But we made it through with only correctable mistakes. And I'm very happy with the result. This bench looks good enough to find in a furniture store, but we have the satisfaction of knowing we made it ourselves.
So that's all we have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this highly educational video and we'll see you next time.